He only did the right thing. That's what he told himself, over and over, as he drove the silent, sleeping form of his boss, the billionaire CEO Elizabeth Vance, through the sleeping streets of Brooklyn. He'd found her at the end of the corporate gala, a ghost in $1,000 gown, too intoxicated to stand, let alone find her way home. He helped her. But the next morning, when she woke up in his daughter's bedroom, wearing clothes that weren't hers, one panicked phone call threatened to shatter the careful, quiet life he had built. For a black man, a single father named Marcus Thorne, there was no room for misunderstanding. The world didn't offer men like him the benefit of the doubt. So what exactly did she do that morning? And why did her moment of terror, born from a night she couldn't remember, almost destroy a good man's life? The morning had begun like any other, with the soft Brooklyn light filtering through the blinds of their modest two-bedroom apartment. It was a sanctuary, a world Marcus had painstakingly constructed for his 9-year-old daughter Zara. The air smelled of cinnamon and the weak coffee he favored. Zara, a whirlwind of boundless energy and profound stillness, sat at their small kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't just coloring, she was creating a universe on a piece of printer paper. "What are you making, sweet pea?" Marcus asked, placing a plate of toast in front of her. His voice was a low, gentle rumble, a sound that was the bedrock of Zara's world. She didn't look up, her focus absolute. "It's for the queen of the big building," she said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. Marcus smiled. The queen of the big building was Zara's name for his boss, Elizabeth Vance. Zara had seen her once, months ago, when he'd had to bring her to work for an hour before his shift started. Elizabeth had swept through the lobby of Vance Holdings, a figure of immense power and untouchable elegance, surrounded by a phalanx of assistants. Zara had been mesmerized. "And why does the queen need a drawing?" he prodded, leaning over to get a better look. On the paper was a woman with a glittering, lopsided crown, standing in a tall glass tower. But it was the eyes that caught him. Zara had drawn 2 big, sad circles. "Because her eyes are lonely, Daddy," Zara said, finally looking up at him. Her own eyes were large and brown, mirrors of her late mother's, and they held a wisdom that often left Marcus breathless. "You know, like when you smile, but your eyes don't. She does that." The simple, devastating accuracy of it hit him in the chest. He had seen it too. In the fleeting moments he was close enough to notice, while polishing the marble floors or replacing a light fixture in a conference room, he'd seen that same look in Elizabeth Vance's eyes, a deep, cavernous sadness that all the money and power in the world couldn't fill. He felt a pang of something, pity maybe, or just a shared human recognition. For years, since his wife Michelle had passed, he'd known that same ache. He had Zara to pull him from it. He wondered who, if anyone, the queen of the big building had. "Well, I'm sure she'll love it," he said, ruffling her hair. "Now eat up. Big day today." Today was the day of Zara's school play. She was playing a firefly in a production called The Little Light. She had 3 lines, and she had been practicing them for weeks, her small face alight with the thrill of performance. Marcus had promised he'd be there, front row center. It was a promise cemented in the sacred pact between a father and his child, a promise he would never, ever break. Keeping promises to Zara was the central pillar of his existence. It was how he honored Michelle's memory. It was how he proved to himself and to the world that he was enough. His job at Vance Holdings was a means to an end. He was a senior maintenance technician, a ghost in the machine of a global empire. He wore a simple grey uniform that rendered him largely invisible, a fact he had long ago learned to use to his advantage. Invisibility was a form of protection. It allowed him to observe without being observed, to do his job meticulously and go home without incident. He was good at his job. He understood the building's circulatory system, its electrical nerves and plumbing guts. He was reliable, quiet, and asked for nothing. In the gleaming world of Vance Holdings, that made him the perfect employee. That evening, the building was transformed. The annual Vance Holdings Gala was in full swing. The lobby, usually a cathedral of corporate austerity, was now a glittering fantasy land of champagne flutes and string quartets. Marcus was part of the late-night cleanup crew, a skeleton staff tasked with restoring order after the revelry died down. His shift started at 10, and he'd be out by 3, home in time to get a few hours of sleep before Zara's big debut. He moved through the periphery of the party, collecting discarded glasses, his presence barely registering to the titans of industry and finance who laughed and networked around him. He overheard snippets of conversation, multi-million-dollar deals, trips to Verbier, complaints about the summer traffic in the Hamptons. It was another language from another planet. It was near the end of his first hour that he saw her. Elizabeth Vance was a vision in a sapphire blue dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. But as she moved through the crowd, Marcus noticed the slight unsteadiness in her step. The smile she offered her guests was bright, but Zara's words echoed in his mind. Like when you smile, but your eyes don't. He saw her drain one glass of champagne, then another, her movements sharp and almost desperate. Later, while wiping a spill near a cluster of fawning junior executives, he heard her voice, brittle and laced with something bitter. They were pitching her an idea, their words sycophantic and empty. She cut them off with a wave of her hand, a laugh that held no humor. Ideas, she scoffed, her words slightly slurred. Everyone has ideas. None of them are original. You want to impress me? Find me one person in this entire building with a single spark of genuine integrity. Just one. Start with that, and maybe I'll consider it. Hell, find me one truly decent person, and I'll marry them on the spot. The executives laughed, a nervous, braying sound. They thought she was joking, making a witty, cynical remark. But Marcus, standing just feet away in his cloak of invisibility, heard the raw, desperate plea beneath the arrogance. It wasn't a taunt. It was a cry for help. He finished cleaning the spill and moved on, the words hanging in the air like smoke. By 2 a.m, the party was over. The grand lobby was a battlefield of abandoned canapes and wilting floral arrangements. The last of the guests had staggered out into the waiting arms of their drivers. Marcus was doing his final sweep of the executive floor, the silence of the massive building a comforting blanket. He was thinking about Zara, about the look on her face when she'd see him in the audience. He checked his watch. Just another hour. That's when he found her. In a deserted corridor near the executive washrooms, Elizabeth Vance was slumped against the cool marble wall. Her sapphire dress was slightly askew. One of her elegant heels lay a few feet away. Her head was bowed, her breathing shallow. She was alone. Marcus froze. This was a situation, a bad one. His mind, conditioned by a lifetime of caution, began calculating the risks. He could walk away, pretend he never saw her, get another member of the crew. But the others had already gone to the lower floors. He could call security, but that would mean a report, a scandal. CEO found unconscious and intoxicated. It would be a corporate nightmare, and his name would be on the report. For a man who prized his invisibility, that was a terrifying thought. He took a tentative step forward. "Miss Vance," he said softly. Her head lifted slowly. Her eyes were unfocused, clouded with confusion and alcohol. She squinted at him, trying to place his face. The uniform registered first. You work here," she mumbled. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Marcus Thorne. Are you all right?" "My driver." She trailed off, trying to look at her phone, but it slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. "He's gone. Phone's dead." She tried to push herself up from the wall, but her legs buckled. Marcus instinctively reached out and caught her arm to steady her. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, unadulterated risk. He was a black man, touching his powerful white female boss in a deserted hallway at 2 in the morning. Every alarm bell in his head was screaming. "Take me home," she commanded, her voice a fragile whisper, all the earlier arrogance gone, replaced by a raw, childlike vulnerability. He looked at his watch, his daughter's play, his promise. He looked at the woman leaning on him, the queen of the big building, reduced to this. He thought about her sad eyes, about Zara's drawing. He thought about the cynical taunt he'd overheard, the desperate search for a single decent person. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that leaving her here wasn't an option, not for him. Michelle had taught him that. You don't turn your back on someone who has fallen. Ever. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "Okay, Ms. Vance, I'll take you home." The choice was made, and in that moment, the simple, ordered world of Marcus Thorne began to tilt on its axis. He had no idea that this one act of decency, this single decision to be visible when it was most dangerous, was about to cost him far more than a front-row seat at a school play. The garage was cavernous and silent, a concrete tomb beneath the glittering tower. Marcus supported Elizabeth's weight, her arm draped over his shoulder. The scent of her expensive perfume was mixed with the stale, sweet smell of champagne. Each step was a minefield of calculations. He checked for security cameras, acutely aware of how this scene would look to anyone watching. He felt like a suspect in a crime that hadn't even been committed yet. They reached her designated parking space. A sleek black Audi sat waiting, a silent testament to her status. Her driver was, as she'd mumbled, gone. The protocol was likely to wait for a set amount of time, and then leave. Her keys were in her small beaded clutch, which he'd retrieved from the floor next to her phone. "Where do you live, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice steady despite the frantic pounding in his chest. He gently eased her into the passenger seat. She slumped against the supple leather, her eyes closed. "Home," she whispered, her voice thick and indistinct. "I need an address, Mom." She mumbled something that sounded like the park and east, but it was incoherent. He tried again, speaking clearly and slowly, but she was drifting, her consciousness slipping away into an alcoholic haze. He was stuck. He couldn't leave her in the car. He couldn't drive aimlessly around Manhattan hoping to jog her memory. And he certainly couldn't take her back upstairs, his own apartment. The thought surfaced, unbidden and terrifying. It was the only place he could think of where she would be safe, where he could control the situation. It was a terrible, reckless idea. The optics were catastrophic. But what was the alternative? Dropping her off at a hospital would trigger a media frenzy. Leaving her with a doorman at a building he couldn't identify was irresponsible. The most dangerous option felt, paradoxically, like the most responsible one. It was a choice between protecting himself and protecting her. And Marcus, guided by a moral compass, forged in love and loss, found he could only make one choice. He buckled her seatbelt, her body limp and unresponsive. He took her phone and plugged it into the car's charger. Then he got into the driver's seat of a car that cost more than he made in 3 years and pulled out of the garage, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The drive from the heart of Manhattan to his neighborhood in Brooklyn was like traveling between dimensions. The glittering skyscrapers gave way to the brick-faced walk-ups and bodegas of his world. The contrast had never felt so stark. He felt the weight of her presence in the car, a silent accusation. He drove carefully, obeying every traffic law with painstaking precision. He imagined being pulled over. "License and registration. Whose car is this, sir? Who is the woman in the passenger seat?" The questions wrote their own disastrous answers in his mind. There is no margin for error. The phrase was a constant refrain, a mantra for survival that had been passed down through generations. Tonight, the margin had shrunk to a razor's edge. Once parked on his street, the next challenge presented itself: getting her from the car to his second-floor apartment. He managed it somehow, half carrying, half guiding her up the stairs, praying none of his neighbors were awake. The building was quiet. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking slightly, and finally got the door open. His apartment, his sanctuary, felt instantly violated by her presence. It was too small, too real. The air, which usually smelled of Zara and home, now seemed charged with risk. He led her past the living room, past the sofa where he and Zara read stories, and into Zara's bedroom. Zara was staying the night with Mrs. Patterson, their downstairs neighbor, an elderly widow with a heart of gold who had become a surrogate grandmother to his daughter. It was their pre-play ritual. Zara loved the sleepover, and it meant Marcus wouldn't have to wake her at the crack of dawn before his shift. He had never been more grateful for that arrangement than he was at this moment. He gently lowered Elizabeth onto Zara's small bed. The room was a universe of a 9-year-old's dreams. Glow-in-the-dark stars were stuck to the ceiling. A menagerie of stuffed animals was piled in a corner, and Zara's drawings were taped to every available surface. On the bedside table sat a framed photo of a smiling woman with kind eyes, Michelle. Marcus looked at the powerful CEO, now just a vulnerable woman asleep in his daughter's bed, and felt a wave of profound unease. He couldn't just leave her in her formal dress. It seemed undignified. He went to his own room and opened a drawer that he rarely touched. Inside were Michelle's things. He pulled out a soft, worn t-shirt and a pair of grey sweatpants. They were clean and smelled faintly of the cedar chest they were stored in. He returned to Zara's room and placed the clothes neatly on the chair next to the bed. He took off Elizabeth's expensive, uncomfortable-looking heels and set them on the floor. He covered her with Zara's unicorn-patterned comforter. He would not, under any circumstances, undress her. The line between helping and violating was one he would not even approach. She could change if she woke up and chose to. Before leaving the room, he took a notepad and pen from Zara's desk. On it, he wrote carefully, his handwriting neat and clear. "You were unwell after the gala. I couldn't get your address and your phone was dead. I brought you here to make sure you were safe. Your car is parked out front. I will be in the living room. My name is Marcus Thorne. I work in maintenance at your building." He propped the note against the lamp on the bedside table, next to a glass of water he'd brought for her. Then came the hardest part. He picked up his phone and dialed Mrs. Patterson's number. It was after 3 in the morning, but he knew she'd be up. "Marcus, honey, is everything all right?" Her voice was warm but laced with concern. His own voice felt thick with failure. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry to call this late. Something's come up at work, a kind of emergency. I'm not going to be able to make it to Zara's play tomorrow." The words tasted like ash. There was a pause. "Oh, Marcus, she'll be so disappointed." I know, and I feel terrible. Could you please tell her I love her and that I'm so proud of her? And could you maybe record it for me on your phone?" "Of course, dear. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll be there with a sign for her." "Is everything really okay?" "It will be," he lied, or maybe he hoped. "I'll explain later. Thank you, Martha. Really." He hung up the phone, and the weight of his broken promise settled on him like a shroud. He had sacrificed the one thing he held sacred. For what? For a woman who wouldn't even remember his name. He couldn't sleep in his own bed. It felt wrong, too intimate, with her in the next room. He couldn't sleep on the couch either, for fear of not hearing her if she woke up disoriented and scared. So he went back into Zara's room. He took the spare blanket from the closet, a thin, worn thing, and laid it on the floor at the foot of the bed. He lay down, his back against the wall, a silent guardian in the dark. He was there to protect her, but more than that, he was there to protect himself from any possible accusation. If she woke up, the first thing she would see was a man sleeping on the floor, fully clothed, keeping a respectful distance. It was his only defense. He stared up at the plastic stars on the ceiling, the same stars he and Zara had put up together one rainy Saturday. He thought of Michelle. What would she have said? She would have understood the choice. He knew. She was the one who taught him that compassion wasn't supposed to be convenient. But she also would have worried. She would have known the danger he was in, the terrible risk he was taking in a world that was not built to be kind to him. Sleep came in fits and starts, haunted by fractured dreams of sirens, of Zara's disappointed face, of a gavel falling in a silent courtroom. He woke with a start to the first grey light of dawn filtering through the window. For a moment, he was disoriented. Then the reality of the situation came crashing back. He heard a rustle from the bed. Elizabeth Vance was stirring. He got to his feet silently and slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. He went to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee, his hands moving on autopilot. He needed the familiar ritual, the semblance of normalcy. He stood by the living room window, watching the city wake up, his back to the rest of the apartment. He waited. Then he heard it, a sharp intake of breath from the bedroom, followed by a long, terrifying silence. He could picture the scene, her waking up in a strange bed, in a child's room, wearing clothes she didn't recognize. The note would be there, but in her state of panic and confusion, would it even register? His heart hammered against his ribs. He heard her fumbling for her phone. Her voice, when it came, was a raw, panicked whisper, carrying clearly into the small apartment's main room. "Claire." "Oh, God, Claire, wake up." A pause. "It's Elizabeth. Listen to me. I woke up in some man's house. I don't know where I am." Marcus stood perfectly still, his back against the wall next to the window. He closed his eyes. This was it. The moment he had spent his entire life trying to avoid. Her voice grew more frantic. "I'm in a bedroom. I'm wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. They're not mine. I don't remember anything after the gala. Anything." He could hear the tinny, sharp sound of the voice on the other end of the phone, a voice of cool, professional alarm. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew what they were. "Are you hurt? Don't touch anything. Where are you? We need to call the police. Now." He knew how this played out. He had seen the stories on the news, read the articles. A black man, his drunk, powerful white boss, in his apartment. It didn't matter what had actually happened. The narrative was already written. He was no longer Marcus Thorne, father, maintenance worker, widower. He was a suspect. His quiet life, his reputation, his ability to provide for Zara, it could all be incinerated in the fire of this one phone call. He held his breath, waiting for the world to end. Elizabeth's hand trembled as she held the phone to her ear. Claire's voice was a steel rod in the fog of her throbbing headache and rising panic. "Elizabeth, listen to me very carefully. Do not hang up. Are you hurt? Is there any sign of a struggle?" "No, I don't think so," she stammered, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. "My head hurts, but that's from the drinking." "Okay, where is he now?" Claire's voice was clipped, already shifting into legal battle mode. "Is he in the room with you?" "I don't know. I haven't heard anything." "Claire, what do I do?" "You do nothing. You stay on the line with me and you call 911 on another phone if you have one. If not, tell me the address from the note you mentioned, and I will send the police to you. Do you understand? We need to control this narrative from the very beginning." The police. The word sent a fresh jolt of terror through her, but also a strange hesitation. Something was off. The raw fear was there, but it was being contradicted by her surroundings. Her lawyer friend's advice made perfect, logical sense in a world of predators and victims. But this room didn't feel like a predator's lair. Her gaze fell upon the drawings taped to the wall. A smiling sun with stick-figure arms, a wobbly-looking dog, a portrait of a man and a little girl holding hands, with the words, "Me and Daddy," scrawled underneath in a child's careful print. She looked at the unicorn comforter pulled up to her chin, at the menagerie of fluffy, wide-eyed stuffed animals watching her from a corner. This wasn't a bachelor pad. This was a home. A child's home. "Elizabeth, are you there? I'm looking up Marcus Thorne. There's a maintenance worker by that name employed by your company. This is bad, Liz. This is very, very bad." Her eyes landed on the note again, propped against the lamp. She read the words for a second time, slower now. "I brought you here to make sure you were safe." Her gaze drifted to the floor at the foot of the bed. She saw a thin, folded blanket and a flattened pillow. Someone had slept there, on the hard floor. A different kind of narrative began to form in her mind, one that fought against the primal fear and Claire's stark warnings. A narrative of care, of profound and respectful decency. A narrative that made no sense. Why would anyone do this? Why would a man, a stranger, take such an incredible risk for her? She swung her legs out of the bed. The sweatpants and t-shirt were soft, clean. They were large on her, but they felt like a shield, not a violation. She stood up, her bare feet on a colorful, alphabet-patterned rug. Taking a deep breath, she walked slowly, cautiously, out of the bedroom. The apartment was small, meticulously clean. The living room was dominated by a bookshelf overflowing with books for both adults and children. On the small dining table, a half-finished drawing sat next to a box of crayons. She saw him then. He was standing by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the morning light. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and his posture was rigid with a tension so palpable she could feel it across the room. He wasn't a threat. He was terrified. He must have heard her, because his voice came, low and steady, not turning to face her. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I work on the night crew at your building. You were unwell last night. I couldn't get your address. I didn't know what else to do." His words were simple, factual. There was no apology, no defensiveness, just a statement of truth, offered up into the tense air between them. And in that moment, Elizabeth knew. She knew with a bone-deep certainty that Claire was wrong, that her own fear was misplaced. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was Claire again, her text flashing on the screen. "Call the police now, Liz. I'm on my way." Elizabeth took a breath, a shuddering, cleansing intake of air. She brought the phone back to her ear. "Claire," she said, her own voice different now, clearer, steadier. "Stop. I need you to just stop and listen to me. Liz, don't be naive. You're in shock. This man—" "Nothing happened," Elizabeth interrupted, her voice firm. "Nothing happened. He helped me when no one else would. He brought me to his home because I was incoherent and couldn't tell him where I lived." She began to walk around the small living room, taking in the details as she spoke, her words painting a picture for her friend and for herself. "He put me in his daughter's bedroom, Claire. His daughter's. He slept on the floor, on a blanket. He left me clean clothes to wear and a note explaining everything. He didn't even take my shoes off my feet until I was asleep." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Claire, the formidable lawyer, was processing a scenario her training had not prepared her for. "He has a daughter," Elizabeth continued, her voice softening as she looked at a photo on the mantelpiece. It was the man, Marcus, with a little girl on his shoulders. They were both laughing, their faces filled with pure, unadulterated joy. In the background was the smiling woman from the photo in the bedroom, his late wife, she presumed. There are pictures of her everywhere. I think he missed something important for her to do this. I think he was just trying to do the right thing." Just then, there was a soft knock on the apartment door. Marcus turned from the window, his face a mask of weary resignation, expecting the worst. He opened the door to reveal an elderly woman with kind, worried eyes. She was holding a phone out. "Marcus, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but Zara insisted." "The woman," Mrs. Patterson said. Then she saw Elizabeth standing in the middle of the living room, looking disheveled in oversized clothes, and she froze, her mouth falling slightly open. "It's okay, Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, his voice gentle as he took the phone. "This is a colleague from work." He looked at the phone screen. A video was playing. It was Zara, dressed in a makeshift costume of black leggings and a yellow t-shirt, little gossamer wings attached to her back. She was in a brightly lit school hallway. "Daddy!" Her small, clear voice chirped from the phone's speaker. "Mrs. Patterson said you had a work emergency. It's okay. We practiced, and Mrs. Davis said you can see the video. I just wanted to say, break a leg, even though you're not here to break a leg for me. And I wanted to show you my firefly dance." She did a little spin, her face beaming. "I love you. Bye." The video ended. The silence in the room was immense. The weight of what Marcus had sacrificed, what he had given up for her, a woman who barely knew his name, crashed down on Elizabeth with the force of a physical blow. He had broken his promise to his daughter. He had missed her play, her moment to shine, to be a firefly. He had missed it to make sure she, Elizabeth Vance, was safe. The polished, controlled facade she had maintained for years finally shattered. The arrogance she had displayed at the party, the cynical taunt about finding a decent person. It all seemed like a lifetime ago, spoken by a stranger she no longer recognized. Tears, hot and shameful, began to stream down her face. It wasn't the crying of a victim. It was the crying of someone who had just been shown a depth of character so profound it made her own life feel shallow and empty by comparison. Her gaze drifted to the refrigerator, covered in more of Zara's artwork. One drawing, held up by a ladybug magnet, stood out. It was the one she had seen her father looking at earlier. A queen in a glass tower, with a glittering crown and profoundly sad eyes. Zara's blocky, 9-year-old handwriting was underneath. "The Queen of the Big Building." "My daughter drew that for you," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. He had seen her looking at it. "She saw you in the lobby a few months ago. She told me this morning." He hesitated, then continued. "She said you looked sad, like the kind where you smile, but your eyes don't." That simple, unfiltered truth, delivered through the innocent wisdom of a child, broke through the last of her defenses. Elizabeth covered her face with her hands and sobbed, a raw, wrenching sound of grief and gratitude that echoed in the small, quiet apartment. She wasn't just the queen of the big building. She was a woman who had been seen, truly seen, not for her power or her wealth, but for the loneliness she tried so desperately to hide. And the person who had seen her was not one of her high-powered peers, but an invisible man who cleaned her floors, and his 9-year-old daughter. Before we continue with Marcus and Elizabeth's story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if stories about everyday heroes and unexpected connections resonate with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We love seeing how far these narratives of kindness and integrity can travel. Now, back to that morning in Brooklyn. The sound of her own sobbing filled the apartment, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity Marcus had shown. He didn't move to comfort her, didn't offer a platitude. He simply stood there, giving her the space to let the emotional dam break. It was another act of respect in a morning filled with them, and it only made her feel more ashamed of her initial panic, of the phone call to Claire. When her sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she looked up at him, her face blotchy, her eyes red. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was a wholly inadequate phrase, a pebble tossed into a canyon of debt. "I'm so sorry for the trouble, for the phone call, for you missing your daughter's play." Marcus finally met her gaze. His eyes were tired, but they held no anger, only a deep, profound weariness. "It's okay, Ms. Vance, you were scared. I understand." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's not okay. None of this is okay. What you did, no one has ever done anything like that for me. Her world was transactional. Favors were exchanged, debts were tracked, loyalty was purchased. This act of selfless, risky compassion was a foreign concept. Her mind, conditioned to solve problems, immediately began to churn. She needed to fix this, to rebalance the scales. Her first instinct, her only instinct, was money. "I need to make this right," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual command. "I'll give you a bonus, a substantial one. We can call it a discretionary award for outstanding service, and a promotion. You're in maintenance? We can create a new position, head of facilities management, something with a real salary. I'll pay for your daughter's, I don't know, her college tuition. Whatever you want, just name it." She saw him flinch, a subtle tightening of his jaw. He looked away from her, toward the picture of his laughing family on the mantel. The air in the room shifted again. The fragile bridge of understanding that had begun to form between them suddenly felt rickety. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through her stream of transactional offers. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "I'm trying to thank you." "You're trying to pay me," he corrected gently, "and what I did last night wasn't for sale." The words landed, a quiet rebuke that was more powerful than any shouting match. He turned back to her, his expression not of anger, but of a teacher patiently explaining a difficult concept. "I appreciate the offer. I do. I know you mean well. But my entire life, I have been taught to be careful, to be invisible, to never give anyone a reason to look at me twice, because that second look is usually trouble. Last night I made a choice to be visible. A dangerous choice. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because you were a person in trouble, and I believe in helping people in trouble. It's what I teach my daughter." He gestured around the small apartment at the evidence of a life built on love and principle, not wealth. "This is my life. It's not much by your standards, I'm sure. But it's a good life. It has dignity. And my dignity isn't something I want to trade for a promotion I didn't earn. I don't want your charity, Mrs. Vance. I just want to be seen for what I did. I want you to understand why I did it." Her world tilted once more. He was turning down a life-changing amount of money. He was turning down a career opportunity most people would kill for. He was choosing his integrity over her fortune. He was teaching her a lesson she hadn't even known she needed to learn. It wasn't about presence over presence, a trite saying from a greeting card. It was about principle over payment, about character over compensation. She felt stripped bare, her power, her wealth, rendered utterly useless. For the first time, she had nothing to offer that the person in front of her actually wanted. All he wanted was her understanding. It was the most profound and humbling negotiation of her life. "I understand," she said, and for the first time she felt the truth of the words. "Thank you, Marcus." She used his first name, a small but significant shift. The title of Miss Vance had been a wall between them. Marcus was a hand extended across the divide. A comfortable silence fell. Mrs. Patterson, who had been hovering awkwardly by the door, finally spoke up. "Well," she said, her voice full of forced cheerfulness, "since the drama is over, would anyone like to actually see the play? I recorded the whole thing." Elizabeth looked at Marcus, a question in her eyes. He gave a small, weary nod. Mrs. Patterson beamed and bustled over to the couch, patting the cushion next to her. "Come on, you two, sit down." Zara was absolutely marvelous, a regular Broadway star. Awkwardly, Elizabeth sat on one end of the worn sofa, and Marcus sat on the other. Mrs. Patterson sat between them, holding up her phone. On the tiny screen, the school's gymnasium-turned-auditorium appeared. The video was a bit shaky, but the sound was clear. They watched as a parade of children dressed as flowers, bees, and woodland creatures took the stage. And then there was Zara, a tiny figure with a huge smile, her little wings fluttering as she moved. When her turn came, she stepped forward into the spotlight. her voice clear and confident as she delivered her 3 lines about the magic of sharing your light with the world. She shone. She was incandescent. Marcus watched, his face a mixture of immense pride and deep sorrow. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. Elizabeth watched him watch his daughter. She saw the love, the sacrifice, the quiet strength that defined him. This was what he had given up for her. A moment that could never be reclaimed. When the video ended with a round of thunderous applause from the parents in the audience, Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes. Wasn't she just the best little firefly you've ever seen? She was, Marcus whispered, his voice choked with emotion. She really was, Elizabeth agreed softly. She looked at Marcus, at this man who inhabited a world so different from her own, yet was governed by a code she was only just beginning to comprehend. The queen of the big building had been rescued, not by a prince or a titan of industry, but by a janitor with a heart full of integrity and a daughter who shone like a star. In the weeks that followed, a quiet seismic shift occurred at Vance Holdings. It started small. Elizabeth began arriving at the office earlier, before the executive floors were buzzing. She walked the hallways of the building, not as a queen surveying her kingdom, but as a student. She stopped by the maintenance office. She learned the names of the cleaning crew, the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the invisible people who made her empire run. She didn't make a grand announcement. She just started seeing them. She'd ask about their families. She'd remember that one guard's son was applying to college, that a woman on the night crew was from the Philippines and missed the food from home. These small acts of recognition sent ripples through the corporate culture. She didn't give Marcus a fake promotion. Instead, she did her research. She found out through HR that he had been taking night classes for the past 2 years, slowly working toward a degree in building engineering and management. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a man with ambition and a plan. Armed with this knowledge, she approached him not with an offer, but with a proposal. She was creating a new, formal apprenticeship program within the company, a real pathway for internal employees to gain management-level experience and qualifications. It would be open to all, based on merit and a rigorous application process. She encouraged him to apply. "It's a real opportunity, Marcus," she told him one afternoon, having asked to meet him in a neutral conference room. "You'd have to earn it. It won't be given to you, but I believe you're more than qualified." He looked at the program outline she'd handed him. It was a ladder, a real one, not a handout. He saw the future it could provide for him and Zara, a future built on his own hard work, validated by a genuine opportunity. He looked up at her, and for the first time he smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll apply." Their relationship evolved into a tentative, unlikely friendship. It was awkward and careful, navigating the vast chasm of class and experience between them. She learned to listen more than she talked. He learned to trust that her intentions were no longer transactional. One Saturday, Zara was participating in her school's science fair. Her project was a painstakingly constructed model of the solar system. Elizabeth called Marcus the day before, her voice hesitant. "I was wondering if it would be all right if I came to Zara's science fair tomorrow," she asked. "Not as your boss, just as a friend, to support her." She paused. "I was also thinking of getting her a small telescope as a gift, for her star chart, but I wanted to ask you first if that would be overstepping." Marcus was touched by her consideration. The old Elizabeth would have just shown up with the most expensive telescope money could buy, a grand gesture meant to impress. The new Elizabeth was asking for permission. She was learning to be present, not just to give presents. "She would love that, Elizabeth," he said warmly. "She'd love for you to be there." So, Elizabeth Vance, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, spent her Saturday afternoon in a crowded, noisy school gymnasium. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a ponytail. She listened with rapt attention as Zara explained the difference between a meteor and a comet. She looked at every single project, from the baking soda volcanoes to the bean sprouts growing in paper cups. She was just another adult in the room, and she seemed more at ease than Marcus had ever seen her in a boardroom. When they presented Zara with the telescope later, the little girl's eyes went wide with wonder. She threw her arms around Elizabeth's neck in a spontaneous, heartfelt hug. "Thank you, Queen Elizabeth," she exclaimed. Elizabeth hugged her back, her eyes shining. "You're welcome, Zara the Firefly," she whispered. Later that evening, Marcus was walking Zara home, her hand tucked securely in his. The sun was setting, painting the Brooklyn sky in shades of orange and purple. He was no longer looking over his shoulder with the same constant, gnawing fear. The world hadn't magically become a fair and just place. The risks were still there. He was still a black man in America, and he would always have to be careful. But something inside him had shifted. That one night, that one terrifying, dangerous choice to be visible, had almost cost him everything. He had walked through the fire of a potential false accusation, a nightmare scenario he had always dreaded. But he had come out the other side. He had been seen. Not just by Elizabeth, but by himself. He had faced the ultimate test of his character and had not faltered. For years, Marcus had lived his life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to never give anyone a reason to question his character. But that night, he had made a different choice, a dangerous choice, and somehow, against all odds, it had led him here, to a place of new hope and unlikely friendship. Maybe the world wasn't fair, maybe it never would be, but maybe, just maybe, there were still people who could see him for who he really was, a father, a good man, Marcus Thorne. And as he squeezed his daughter's hand, he felt a profound sense of peace. Maybe that was enough. From invisible to unforgettable. Marcus's story reminds us that character isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in the quiet choices we make when we think no one is watching. In the sacrifices we make for what we know is right. He proved that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you almost everything. If you believe in stories about everyday heroes and the power of integrity, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more stories that inspire. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that a person's true worth is measured not by their title, but by their character. And let us know in the comments, what does the word dignity mean to you?